Every case leaves a trace, a name, a date, a question that was never answered. This is Silent Shadows. On the morning of December 16, 1931, a child was found lying in the front garden of a house on Addison Road in West London. She had been missing for nearly 2 days. Her name was Vera Page, and she was 10 years old. What investigators found on her clothing and beneath one of her arms would lead them to believe that this garden was not where she had died. The case would bring an intense police inquiry, a closely watched inquest, and eventually questions in Parliament. One local man came under particular scrutiny, but scrutiny is not proof. No witness had seen him with Vera, the physical evidence could not establish a connection, and nobody was ever charged. More than anything, Vera's case became a mystery built around a missing stretch of time and a very short journey home. So let's back up to December 14th. Vera lived with her family in Notting Hill, an area of West London made up of busy roads, quieter residential streets, shops, terraces, and narrow passages. That day she was sent on a simple errand. She was to visit an aunt who lived nearby and collect some swimming certificates. It was the kind of trip that should have been ordinary, familiar, and brief. Vera reached her aunt's home and collected the certificates. That much was established. Then she set out for home. The distance was short enough that there seemed little reason for concern at first, but Vera never arrived. Somewhere between her aunt's house and her own front door, she disappeared, leaving no confirmed account of where she went next or whom she may have encountered. That absence is at the center of everything. There was no reliable sighting that explained Vera's movements after she began the return journey. No witness could point to a particular doorway, vehicle, or companion and say with certainty that this was where her route changed. The errand had taken her only a short distance from home, yet the final part of it became almost completely blank. When Vera failed to return, concern turned into alarm. Police inquiries began, and people in the surrounding area were asked what they had seen. Streets that must have felt familiar to Vera now became part of a search. Investigators needed to reconstruct her route, identify anyone who had noticed her, and determine whether she had been persuaded to enter a building or had been forced away from the street. 2 nights passed without an answer. Then, on the morning of December 16th, Vera's body was discovered in the front garden of number 89 Addison Road. The location was roughly a mile from her home. She had not been carefully buried or permanently concealed. She had been left in a place where daylight would eventually reveal her. Close to a residence but outside, exposed to discovery. The postmortem established that Vera had been sexually assaulted and strangled. There is no need to describe more than that. She was a 10-year-old child, and the medical findings made clear that her death was a deliberate act of violence. But the examination also raised a second question. Had Vera been attacked in that garden, or had someone brought her there after she was already dead? Investigators found material on Vera's clothing that seemed out of place. There was coal dust, along with traces of candle wax. Neither substance could identify a specific room or building by itself. Coal was common in London homes, and candles had many ordinary uses. Still, their presence mattered because they suggested contact with an indoor environment, perhaps somewhere used for storage, heating, work, or concealment. Now here's where the case gets strange. Beneath Vera's arm was a small finger bandage, often described in accounts of the case as a fingerstall. A fingerstall is a covering designed to protect an injured finger, sometimes made from cloth or similar material. It did not appear to belong naturally where it was found, tucked beneath her arm, and it carried a noticeable smell of ammonia. That object became one of the most discussed clues in the investigation. Had it caught on Vera's clothing while she was being moved? Had it belonged to the person who handled her, or had it come from the place where she had been held? The ammonia odor seemed potentially significant, but significance and certainty are different things. The fingerstall offered investigators a direction, not a definitive answer. Taken together, the coal dust, candle wax, and ammonia-smelling bandage supported a troubling possibility. Vera may have been killed, or at least concealed, somewhere indoors before being carried to Addison Road. If that was true, the murder scene and the place where her body was found were separate locations. Police were therefore searching not only for a killer, but also for an unknown room or building. That possibility widened the inquiry considerably. A mile in London contains countless doors, cellars, sheds, workshops, passageways, and private spaces. The substances on Vera's clothing were suggestive, but they were also common. Investigators could not simply find coal dust in one building and declare the mystery solved. They needed a combination of evidence strong enough to place Vera there and connect another person to her death. The movement of the body also created practical questions. Whoever left Vera in the garden had to reach Addison Road without being reliably observed or remembered. Perhaps the person knew the area. Perhaps the garden appeared accessible and quiet at the relevant moment. But without a confirmed time of death, a witnessed journey, or a proven vehicle, the process of moving her remained another gap in the timeline. Police conducted extensive inquiries, speaking with local residents and examining possible leads. In a case involving a child, suspicion can spread rapidly, especially when the crime occurs within a close neighborhood. Yet investigators still had to separate rumor from evidence. A person seeming unusual, evasive, or unpopular was not enough. The central requirement remained the same: proof connecting someone to Vera during the period in which she vanished. One local man became the subject of especially close attention. At the inquest, he was questioned in detail about matters investigators considered relevant. His presence in the proceedings inevitably drew public interest, but it's important to be precise here. Being questioned, even aggressively, does not mean that a person has been shown to be guilty. An inquest examines circumstances. It does not replace a criminal trial. The coroner made a crucial point. Nobody had seen this man with Vera. That absence did not resolve every suspicion, but it created an obvious evidential problem. There was no eyewitness placing the two together, no confirmed account of Vera entering premises connected to him, and no direct observation explaining how she might have traveled from her route home to the garden on Addison Road. The Fingerstall was also examined as a possible forensic link. Investigators hoped its material might be compared with other bandage material associated with the inquiry. If the fabrics matched in a distinctive way, perhaps the small object beneath Vera's arm could connect the crime to a particular source. But the comparison did not produce a conclusive result. Material could not carry the case across the line from suspicion to proof. That limitation matters because forensic science in 1931 could answer far fewer questions than it can today. There was no routine genetic profiling capable of identifying who had handled a small piece of fabric. Microscopic comparison might reveal similarities in fibers or construction, but a similarity was not necessarily unique, and when the result itself was inconclusive, investigators were left with an object that remained compelling but unidentified. The same problem applied to the traces on Vera's clothing. Coal dust might indicate a coal cellar, a fireplace area, a storage space, or simple environmental transfer. Candle wax could point toward a room lit or used in a particular way, but it could not supply an address. Each clue narrowed the story in one sense, suggesting an indoor location, while leaving the actual geography almost impossibly broad. Think about the unanswered sequence. Vera collected the swimming certificates. She left her aunt's home. At some point before reaching her own home, she encountered something or someone that changed her course. She then came into contact with coal dust and candle wax. A finger bandage smelling of ammonia ended up beneath her arm. Finally, her body was transported approximately a mile and left in a front garden. Every stage requires an explanation, but the evidence never supplied one complete chain. Did Vera know the person who approached her? Was she invited indoors under an innocent pretext? Was the indoor location close to her aunt's home, close to Addison Road, or somewhere between them? And was the Fingerstall dropped accidentally during the assault, during concealment, or while her body was being carried? None of those questions received a proven answer. The inquest continued into the new year. Witnesses and investigators presented what could be established, while the coroner kept attention on the distinction between inference and fact. Public suspicion may have focused on a particular individual, but the proceedings could not manufacture a sighting that did not exist or turn an uncertain fabric comparison into a positive identification. The evidence pointed toward murder, but not decisively toward a murderer. On February 10, 1932, the inquest jury returned its verdict. Vera Page had been murdered by a person or persons unknown. The wording acknowledged both the certainty and the uncertainty at the heart of the case. Her death was not accidental, and it was not unexplained in a medical sense. The unresolved question was identity. Who had taken her, attacked her, strangled her, and carried her to Addison Road? A verdict of murder by an unknown person did not end the police investigation. Inquiries continued, and the case attracted attention beyond the immediate neighborhood. Questions were raised in Parliament, reflecting concern about the investigation and the absence of an arrest, but political attention could not repair the missing evidence. However strongly officials wanted progress, a prosecution still required a suspect who could be connected to the crime through admissible, persuasive proof. No such case emerged. Nobody was charged with Vera's murder. The local man questioned at the inquest was never convicted, and the unresolved forensic comparison could not fairly be treated as though it had established guilt. That is especially important when looking back from a distance. Historical suspicion often hardens into certainty through repetition. But repetition does not create evidence that investigators and the coroner did not actually possess. There is another difficulty with an old case like this. Records preserve official findings and prominent clues, but they do not always preserve every small decision, rejected lead, or neighborhood conversation. We know the broad route of Vera's errand, the location where she was found, the medical cause of death, and the unusual material evidence. What we do not have is the single observation that would join those facts together. The swimming certificates make the story particularly painful because they mark how ordinary Vera's day was supposed to be. She was not undertaking a distant journey or entering an obviously dangerous setting. She was collecting something from a relative nearby and walking home. the person responsible exploited an everyday moment. Somewhere inside a small radius that should have felt safe and familiar to a child. And then there's the garden at number 89 Addison Road. It became permanently associated with the discovery, but it may have been only the final location chosen by the killer. If Vera had been concealed indoors, the true center of the crime was elsewhere, behind one of the many doors investigators tried to account for. The garden offered police a body and physical traces, but not the room from which those traces came. The Fingerstall remains the case's most distinctive object. Small enough to be overlooked by whoever moved Vera, it seemed as though it ought to reveal something intimate about the offender or the hidden location. Yet it never did. Its odor, material, and position generated theories, but not identification. It was a clue with the shape of an answer, and that may be why it has remained so memorable, more than 9 decades later. The responsible person has never been established. The official conclusion remains the one reached in February 1932. Vera Page was murdered by a person or persons unknown. Her case endures not because suspicion was absent, but because suspicion could not be proved. And beneath all the unanswered forensic questions is the simple fact that Vera left on a short walk home and was never allowed to finish it. If this case stayed with you, there are others waiting. Subscribe to Silent Shadows and walk with us into the next one.